I think that waking up with a high blood sugar is incredibly frustrating. One thing is that here and now my blood sugar is high. I just woke up and I'm trying to start my day, but also just thinking about having to run high all night long, that's like 8 hours of high blood sugars. Just thinking about it annoys me. But just being frustrated about it doesn't help. Doing things to help prevent those high blood sugars, well. So in this video, I'll show you 4 things that I eat before bed that will not mess up my blood sugars overnight. And I'll also show you a few offenders that I, for the most part, stay clear of because I just know that it'll mess up my blood sugars overnight. I'm Christelle from Diabetes Strong, and I've been living with type 1 diabetes since 1997, so for a long time now. I find that the easiest way to help prevent high blood sugars overnight is to stop eating fairly early in the evening. That doesn't always work for me though. Sometimes I'm hungry. And something that's always been very important to me is to not let my diabetes dictate my life. So it definitely influences what I choose to eat and do, but I'd rather figure out how to make those things work for me and my diabetes than the other way around. And that also means that if I'm hungry, I'll eat. And eating before bed can actually be good for you if you choose the appropriate things. One of my go-tos is low-fat cottage cheese. So this stuff. I got really into cottage cheese when I was a competitive bodybuilder. Yes, I did that. Building muscle and becoming insanely fit is doable with diabetes. Anyway, back when I was extremely focused on feeding my body quality protein, I discovered the wonders of cottage cheese, both from a health perspective as well as from a blood sugar perspective. Cottage cheese is high in protein, about 13 grams in a half a cup. It's high in calcium and vitamin B12, so it's ideal for anyone with a tendency to be anemic, and it's low in carbs. It only has 6 to 7 grams per half cup. If you look at the nutrition label, you'll see that the carbs are sugar carbs. Not to worry, it's because it's a dairy product. Dairy has lactose, and lactose is a naturally occurring sugar. I'm actually okay with carbohydrates. I just try to minimize them at night. So for dinner, I'll usually stay between 20 to 25 grams of carbs. And if I'm eating a snack, I like to keep it down to 10 to 15 grams. So back to cottage cheese. We now know that it's healthy, that's great, but if we just focus on the blood sugar impact, the reason why cottage cheese is such a great snack from a blood sugar perspective is that it's not just high in protein, but it's a casein protein. And casein protein gets absorbed really slowly. So when it comes to cottage cheese, we have 2 things going on that can help prevent a blood sugar spike as well as that increase overnight. And the first thing is, as I mentioned, that it's very high in protein. So all foods that are high in protein has the potential of stabilizing blood sugars as it can slow down the absorption of carbohydrates. And the other thing is that it's a casein protein. So casein protein just gets absorbed slower than other types of protein. And this is of course all great on paper and it works for me, but we're all different. So I would recommend that you try it out and try to figure out the serving size that works for you. I generally only eat half a cup and I like to eat it like this. I chop up cucumbers and tomatoes, add a little pepper and mix it all up. It's so good. If you want to try to slow down the blood sugar impact even further, you can add a vegetable that's even higher in fiber, such as, for example, celery. I really don't like celery, so that's why I don't do that. Another thing that I find to be a really good option to eat at night is Greek yogurt, which is another protein source. I guess there is a pattern here. I'll reach for yogurt if I'm hungry and craving something sweet. You do have to be careful when you choose your yogurt, though. A lot of them, unfortunately, are sugar bombs disguised as something healthy. Greek yogurt can be a great choice for blood sugar management as it's high in protein, and as I mentioned before, that can help slow down the absorption of carbohydrates. And when you do choose your yogurt, I recommend that you choose one that's low or have no added sugars. These Chobani zero sugar Greek yogurts are currently my favorite choice for when I'm hungry at night and want something sweet. They're not overly sweet though, and with only 5 grams of carbohydrates per container, I hardly see a blood sugar impact. I'll sometimes add a few berries to the yogurt, but for the most part, I just eat them as is. We do have to talk about this high protein, low carb combination though, because it's not just carbs that will impact blood sugars. It's what hits the bloodstream the most aggressively though, and that's why we focus so much on them. I generally like high protein foods because for me, I see a limited blood sugar impact. They're generally healthy and they'll help keep me full. But you might see a small impact on your blood sugars from eating high amounts of protein. And if you inject insulin to manage your blood sugars like I do, you might notice that you need a small amount of insulin to cover really high amounts of protein. So keep an eye on it. Measure your blood sugars before you eat and then again an hour and a half to 2 hours after you're done eating. And then assess if you need a little bit of insulin, maybe you need to adjust your dose, or if you do not use insulin, maybe you need to adjust your serving size. And those were my 2 high protein options for when I'm hungry before bed and I don't want to see my blood sugars just shoot up. But there are also situations where I eat not so much because I'm hungry, but rather because I'm nervous that my blood sugars might dip too low overnight. This is primarily an issue for us who manage our blood sugars using insulin. Generally, it shouldn't happen. But if we inject too much insulin or if our insulin is just not titrated correctly, there is a risk. And talking about titration, if you find that your blood sugars dip too low most nights, every night, or just too frequently, you should have a conversation with your doctor because it probably means that your long-acting insulin is not titrated correctly. Okay, so in these situations where I want to balance out my blood sugars and my insulin and keep that low blood sugar at bay, I usually reach for a carbohydrate, and my go-to is a rice cake. This one has 10 grams of carbs per cake, and it has a thin layer of chocolate on it. I just got it at my local store. I don't think the brand matters, but rather that it doesn't have more than 10 grams of carbs per rice cake. Yes, I could just eat the bland rice cakes, but I find that they get starchy really quickly, and the chocolate ones just don't. And I really like chocolate. I choose rice cakes because it's just such an easy snack and won't spike my blood sugars. And because it has very limited amounts of proteins, fibers, and fats, it's not a food that will linger in the sense that I won't see it increase overnight. And it just really works for me. The downside to rice cakes is that it doesn't really have any nutritional value aside from the carbs. You could add a topping to it, but then you add proteins or fats or fiber for that matter, and that just means that it changes how it's going to impact your blood sugars. It might work for you, so you can always test it out. That's 3 foods down that will not mess up my blood sugars overnight. Now let me show you my 4th option before we get to those foods that I generally stay clear of because I know that they'll mess up my blood sugars. And my 4th choice are for those nights where I'm not really hungry, I'm more hungry for fun, if that makes sense. My general rule of thumb is then, if you're not hungry, don't eat. But back to the whole point about me not wanting my diabetes to dictate my life, and sometimes watching a movie and munching on a snack is just the best combination. So what I do is that I choose a snack that won't mess up my blood sugars overnight. I used to favor snacking on almonds, but if you've seen a few of my videos, you know that almonds, they just don't really work for me anymore. Unfortunately, they really mess up my blood sugars. So now I go for macadamias. Macadamias are 33% lower in carbohydrates than almonds, and 50% lower than cashews. It's the highest in healthy monosaturated fats, and it's the only nut with omega-7s. And it's found to be better for gut health. Okay, so that was the health benefits. But what I really like is that I hardly see a blood sugar impact, and I really like a lot of the flavors, especially these from House of Macadamias. My go-to is the salted macadamias. It's just the nuts and a touch of sea salt. And if I want something sweet, I'll have one of these bars. It is a high-calorie snack, so I really like that these are packed in appropriate portions. It also just makes it much easier to take them with me. So it's not just a good evening snack, they're also really good for traveling. Because when I'm going to be sitting for prolonged periods of time, I generally don't want to reach for a high-carb snack. Anyway, I'm such a fan of these that I actually created my own bundle on the House of Macadamias website. Here you can find my favorites, so the salted macadamias, the bars, as well as the white chocolate nut butter. It's so good. You can get 10% off if you use my code STRONG, and I'll leave a link in the video description if you want to check that out. So those are the 4 foods that I'll eat at night before bed and that I know won't mess up my blood sugars overnight. But I also promised you an overview of some of those food and snacks that I just stay clear of because I just know that they'll mess up my blood sugars. My first no-go is big meals. It doesn't matter how healthy they are. In my experience, really big meals right before bed just doesn't work. When we sleep, our digestion slows down. So unfortunately, that can mean that when we eat really big meals before bed, it will be released slowly into the bloodstream overnight. And that can mean that blood sugar rise to just keep going and you end up waking up with high blood sugars. It can also interrupt your cardiac rhythm, meaning poor sleep. It's just not worth it for me. I also stay clear of high fat, high carb meals such as potato chips, chocolate, or ice cream. The high carb, high fat combination is just a blood sugar nightmare. When you combine a lot of carbohydrates with a lot of fats, even healthy fats, that slows down digestion and thereby the release of glucose into the bloodstream. Slowing down the digestion can work to our advantage when we're eating smaller amounts of carbs, as it can blunt the blood sugar spike. So we see more of a steady release rather than a quick release of glucose into the bloodstream. However, when we're eating very large amounts of carbs, slowing down the digestion, yes, we might not see as much of a spike up front, but you'll see the carbohydrates get released into the bloodstream over several hours. Often we'll see that as a dual blood sugar increase. So there'll be one increase when we eat, and then again, several hours later, we'll see the second blood sugar increase. For us who use insulin, the way that we usually deal with this is to do a dual dose. So that means giving maybe half of the insulin up front, and then the other half that 1.5 to 2 hours later. That's just really hard to do if you're sleeping though. Also, I find that second wave can be a little bit unpredictable, so I'll usually not inject the second amount of insulin until I see my blood sugars start to creep up. That means I have to pay attention. Again, really hard when I'm sleeping. Not worth the headache in my opinion. And if I'm really craving ice cream, I'll reach for a low carb option, such as the Halo ice cream. The peanut butter swirl is actually pretty good, and it won't mess up my blood sugars overnight. Nighttime is of course only one point in time where we have to think about our blood sugar management. But given that we sleep about a third of our life, running high for that long is just not okay with me. I also created a video on how you can avoid high blood sugars after meals, and you can find that here. And since you're here, why not subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications? That way you'll never miss a thing. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.